Welcome everyone to part 12 of the Sci-Fi first-person shooter tutorial series. In this video, we'll be finishing our game over logic for our project. We already have some logic set up in our MasterFPSCharacter for when a character dies. We'll just want to create a widget for that event. And we'll also want to create an event to check to see if we've completed our level goal of defeating all the enemies within the level. If we have, then we'll create a different widget called the LevelEndWidget and add that to the viewport. Let's start by creating our game over widget. If you'll remember, we set up a game over event in our MasterFPSCharacter, but we never made a widget to display when the event's called. Today, we'll finally be finishing this event. So let's go to our widget folder, and we can create a new widget. Let's right-click, go to User Interface, Widget Blueprint, and we can call this the Game Over Widget. And with this widget created, we can go back to our MasterFPSCharacter. Let's search for our game over logic right here, and we can hook this up and make sure that the widget it creates is the newly created game over widget. Compile and save. We're also going to want to make sure that our player character's death causes game over variable is set to true. So let's minimize this, go to characters, and in their class defaults, we can scroll down to death causes game over and set that to true. Now, whenever our player character dies, their death event will fire. Death causes game over will be set to true, so it'll also fire their game over event, causing the game over widget to be added to the viewport. And that's great and all, but our game over widget right now is empty, so let's add some design elements. Let's minimize this, and we can go back to our widgets folder, double click to open up the game over widget. And we're really just going to want the game over widget to have a couple things: game over text and two buttons. One button will be our retry button to reload the game level, and the other button will be our main menu level. We can do the text first just by dragging our text right into the canvas panel. I'm just going to call this game over text. In the showcase video, I used images for everything, including the game over text. But in this video, I think it's better if we continue using text for the game over text, but use images for the buttons. But first, we're going to need to import a custom text for our game over text. And I went with the classic Star Wars text in the showcase video, so let's get the Star Wars text into the Unreal Engine and then use it in our widget. We can import the Star Wars font for free from dafont.com. I'll leave a link in the description box below, or we can use the images provided in the asset pack from the previous videos. To import the font, we'll just want to download the font. Then we'll need to extract this, so let's extract here. And I'm going to use the Star Jedi font. We can see the TrueType font file. In Unreal Engine, we might want to create a new folder for it, so we can just call this font, and simply drag and drop the Star Jedi font into the Unreal Engine. It's going to ask us if we want to create a new font asset. Just say yes to all. And now we have our Star Jedi font right here. I'm also going to set the color for this folder just to match our font. That way we can easily see it in our content browser. And with all that done, we can go back to our game over widget. With our text selected, we should have a new font family. We can select Star Jedi font. And it looks pretty good. We're just going to want to set size to content to true so that the bounding box for the text adjusts automatically based on the font size. Speaking of which, we can change this to a larger size, like 160. And let's give it a nice outline by going down to outline size, and I think 10 will be reasonable for this as well. Clearly, we don't want the text to just say text block, so we can go to our content tab and change what the default text says. I'm just going to change it to something like defeated. And I'll center the text at the top, so we'll just change the anchor to the top center, 0 at the X position, and change the pivot to 0.5 so that it's in the middle. Our game over text is looking pretty good. Now let's create two buttons to allow our player to restart the level or open up the main menu level from this widget. Like usual, we'll just create and fully complete one button and then duplicate it later so that we don't have to do all the work over again. It's a slightly smarter way to make widgets. So let's go to our palette tab and drag a button into the canvas panel. We can call this button our Retry Button. So we'll set this one up to reload the current level whenever it's pressed. And like many widgets, we'll want to have it set to size to content so that it automatically adjusts its size based on the image that we'll set for it. And we're going to want to change the normal style of the retry button. So let's open that up under the appearance tab. And let's set the image to our texture retry. And we want to make sure that this image is drawn as an image. And to make it a little faster, we can just copy our normal style and paste it over our hovered style and our press style so that all of these attributes like the image and the draw as are pasted right over to these two different appearances. And to match the showcase video, we can change our hovered style. In the showcase, the button kind of turns to like a goldish whenever we hover over the retry and the main menu, so we can go over tint and just change it to a nice gold, something like this. It's actually kind of more of a yellow, and that's looking pretty good. While we're here editing the appearance, we can change the hovered sound just to match our cue that we made in the last video. And it looks pretty good for the appearance. Instead of having it way up here on the top left, we can anchor it to the center, zero out its X and Y position, and we can change its X alignment to 0.5. Okay, the retry button looks great. Let's go into our level and die as fast as possible. And that's perfect. So the widget's popping up, but there's a couple things that's going on. We'll fix those later. First of all, our HUD widget isn't disappearing, and our input mode is staying in game only. But we'll fix that once these designer elements are completed. Before we move on to the main menu button, one thing that was kind of bugging me is the outline color for our text is different than the outline color from these images. So we can go and select our text, go down to the outline settings. Under outline color, we can change it by hitting this little eyedropper and just changing it to a nice gray. I'm going to try to get one of these darker grays. There we go. Now the outline colors match a little bit better. So we can duplicate our retry button, compile and save. We can rename this to our main menu button. Let's change the image to our texture main menu. We can copy that, paste it over our hovered, and paste it over our pressed. Compile and save. And we don't want the main menu button to be smack right on top of our retry button, so let's bring this down to about 200 position Y. And there we go, our buttons are complete. But I think we can take this widget one step further by having a small animation play when the widget's constructed. And constructed is like begin play for widgets. I think we can put a texture underneath everything and just have it fall down when the widget's constructed. And we can have all the buttons and text just fade in when that happens. So to start, we'll go ahead and drag an image into our canvas panel, but we want it to be behind everything, so we'll drag it all the way to the top of the hierarchy. That'll ensure that this image is behind everything else in the widget so that we can still click on our buttons. Let's change the name of this image to something like blood background and change the brush. We can just change it to our blood background. And I think it'll be easier to animate if the blood background is directly in the middle. So let's go ahead and set its pivot point to 0.5, 0.5, anchor to the center, and zero out its X and Y positions. Obviously, this blood is going to have to be a little bit bigger than that, so let's change size X to 3000 and size Y to 2000. And I don't actually want the blood to cover the whole background, so let's raise it a little bit by changing its position Y to negative 275. Let's also make it slightly transparent by changing its tint alpha to something like 0.85. That way the player can slightly see through it when they die. And there we go. This can be our blood background's final position, but we should animate it so that it kind of slides down the screen. And to do this, we'll need to make an animation, which is in the lower left-hand corner of the widget blueprint, and we're only going to need to make one animation. Animations can be a little complex, but I'll try my best to make it digestible. To create a new animation, we just want to click plus on the animations. We can call this defeated, since this animation is only going to happen when we're defeated. If you click on the animation, that'll open up our timeline, and we'll see this timeline here on the bottom center. And if you know anything about animation, you'll know that it's generally based on keyframes and interpolation over time between those keyframes. For example, if we wanted our background to be here at 0.4 seconds, we can set a keyframe for its Y position to be there at 0.4 seconds. But we can start by having the background way up here if we set a keyframe way up there at 0. So let's put it up there and set a keyframe, and now we can see it interpolates between those two keyframes over the 0.4 seconds. But here's another example. If I wanted to get my text, my retry button, and my main menu button to change the render opacity over time, we can have them be fully visible at 0.75 seconds by setting a keyframe at render opacity 1 right here at 0.75 seconds. We can go to a point that we want them to start becoming visible and have them start off as invisible, and so they'll become visible over time. And just to be sure that they all start off as invisible, we can go to the beginning of our timeline and just set another keyframe there. So they'll be invisible between our first keyframe and our second keyframe, but between our second keyframe and our third keyframe, they'll start to become visible. Now if we scrub through our timeline, we'll see basically what our animation is going to look like. And that's about it for creating an animation. This is actually exactly what I wanted our animation to look like. Now we just need to add a bit of functionality to our widget, so let's head over to the event graph. We can delete these two nodes here. We're only going to need event construct, and just like in the last video, we're going to set our input mode to UI only at event construct. So we can do the exact same thing. We can get our player controller, we can cast it to our PC Sci-Fi, promote that to a variable. We'll just call it the same thing, PC, and we can call our change input mode function. We're going to want to leave this false since we're changing to UI only, and we're going to plug in ourself, the game over widget blueprint, as the in widget to focus on. Also on event construct, after we set up our input mode, we're going to want to play this defeated animation as soon as the widget's constructed. So let's get our animation, and we can drag off of it, search for play animation, and plug in the executes. We only want it to play once, so we can leave all of the defaults here on the play animation node. With that done, let's go to our editor, get killed as fast as possible. I think this guy kills faster. And we'll see the animation happens, and our buttons are working properly when we hover over them. Now, let's set up those two buttons. Back in our game over widget, we can get the on pressed event for our retry button, and we're going to want to load our current level. So we can right click and search for get current level name, plug in the executes there, and we can right click and search for open level by name, plug in the executes, and plug in the string into the name. It'll automatically convert the string into a name for you. But we don't want to get stuck in our UI only input mode, so let's copy this and change our input mode before we load up the level again. Plug in the executes, get a reference to our player controller, and game only, yes, since we're going to reload our current level, which is going to be the level that we're firing at enemies in. Opening up our main menu level off of our main menu button is going to be a little bit easier since we're already in the UI only input mode. All we have to do is call our open level function and type in our main menu level. You just really have to make sure that this is spelled correctly. There we go. Let's play in the editor, get killed as fast as possible. Retry, opens the same level, has the correct input mode, get killed again, main menu, and now we're in our main menu level. And that's it for our game over widget. Looks like everything is working as planned. The animation works, the button works, the text is looking good. So now we can transition to actually beating the game. And we're going to need a new widget, a level end widget that appears when we beat the game. The fastest way to make a level end widget is just to duplicate our game over widget. Let's just change it to level end widget. We can open it up, and we're not going to need our background, so we can delete that. But we will need to see everything, so let's select our text, our retry button, our main menu button, and change the render opacity to 1. I'm just going to change the name of the game over text to level complete text. And you can change this text to whatever you want. I'll just change it to you win. Compile and save. And you know what? Actually, it can be a little bit larger, like 180. Get really excited that you beat the level. We can change the retry button name to our play again button. Since the word retry kind of implies that you lost, so play again works better in the level end widget. Then we can just come over to the appearance and change it to our play again texture. We can copy that, paste it for our pressed, and paste it for our hovered. Everything else can basically stay the same. One thing that we'll need to destroy though is our defeated animation. There's not going to be an animation on this. We can just get rid of this logic here on event construct. But the buttons do the same thing. The main menu button still opens the main menu level, and the play again button still opens the same level that you're in. The input modes should be changed accordingly as well. Now we'll just want our player character to handle the rest of the level complete logic. We really just need our player character to check how many enemies there are at begin play, and whenever an enemy's killed, check to see if there are any more enemies still alive. If there aren't, then we can create the LevelEndWidget and hide our heads-up display. So we can close out of our LevelEndWidget, our Game Over widget, just keep our player character open. So in our player character, after event begin play, which actually I'm going to make a macro, we can condense that down. Make sure to plug in the execute to the output though, so we can continue doing things afterwards. Let's name this create heads-up display. And you know, it might be better to have our heads-up display not be created at event begin play, but instead at event possessed. In case we wanted to do like a small camera animation or something before we possess our character. But this is still going to work because whenever we take control of this character, then we'll create our heads-up display. That's actually a little bit more accurate to what you think of with first-person shooters. But anyways, at event begin play, we will want our player character to get all of the enemies in the level and just have a list of them. So what we can do is we can right-click, get all actors of class, plug that in. We can specify our enemy characters and just promote that output to a variable. We can call this all enemies. And since we have a list of all the enemies in the level, what might come in handy later is if we do a for each loop. So for every enemy on our list, we set their player character variable just to ourselves. That way all the enemies just right off the bat will know who the player character is. So let's go for each loop. We're going to get the enemy's player character variable, and we can set their player character variable to ourself. That way we don't have to cast to the player character at any point during the enemy's logic. And our player character is going to need a function to check if there are any more enemies remaining in this list, in this array. So let's create a function, and we can call this our enemies check. As the name suggests, we'll set it up to check to see if there are any more enemies in our all enemies list. After getting a reference for all our enemies, we can do a for each loop with break, plug in the execute. Really, we're just going to want to go through this list and check to see if each item is valid. And whenever an enemy dies, they'll just remove themselves from this list. So eventually, once they're all dead, nothing will be valid on this list. Let's make a local Boolean variable. We can call this local value, and we can set that local value only if something's valid. And if something is valid, we'll stop our for each loop and go to the completed execute. So when this for each loop with break is completed, we're going to want to do two different things based on this local value. So let's get a reference to the local value and do a branch. If at any point one of our enemies is valid and this goes to the true path, that means we're not done with the level. So we should just return like normal. So let's search for our return node and plug that into the true. But if the function goes through the whole list and none of the enemies are valid, that means they've all been defeated. So our local value will be false, and we can call our level completed event, which we haven't created yet. So let's go to our event graph, create a custom event, call it level complete, and go back to our enemies check function, and we can just search for level complete, plug that into the false, and then return like normal. So once again, our enemies check function will check to determine if we've defeated all the enemies in the level or not. It'll get our list of enemies, which we got at event begin play, and it'll go through each item on the list, checking to see if it's valid. If it's not valid, it'll just go to the next item on the list, not valid, next item on the list, all the way until the end. Once all the items on the list have been checked, it'll go to the completed execute, check to see what our local value is. Its default value is false, so if it's never changed to true, it'll still be false, and call the level complete event. If at any point any of these enemies are still valid, it'll go to the execute is valid, set the local value to true, and stop this for each loop, automatically bringing it to the completed. Our local value will be true since we set it to true, and it won't do the level complete event. Now let's set up our level complete event. So what do we want to have happen when the level's actually complete? Well, the first thing that we want to do is get our player HUD widget and set its visibility to hidden. We don't want the HUD widget and the level end widget to be stacked on top of each other. It just doesn't look good. So we're going to hide our player HUD widget first thing. Next, if we're in automatic firing mode and still firing our weapon, when we're put into UI input mode only, it's going to continue firing our weapon. So let's stop that by setting our fire mode, set firing weapon to false. Similarly, if we're still moving when our input mode is set to UI only, our character is going to keep moving even when the game's over. So let's right click and let's disable our movement from our character movement. Plug that right in. After we disable character movement, we can make things look a little bit cool by doing a global time dilation. We can set the global time dilation to something nice like 0.2 maybe. That way the last kill we get will just be in slow motion. You don't have to do this, but I like the effect that it adds. And then after all of that's done, we can create a widget, plug in the executes. We're going to want to create our level end widget and add it to the viewport. And there we go. So we have our level complete functionality all intact. There's only one last thing that we need to do. We need to make it so our enemies, when they die, they remove themselves from this array and have them call the enemies check function from our player character. To do all that, we'll need to go to our enemy blueprint. So let's open up our BP enemy, go back to our event graph, and in our BP enemy, we're no longer going to need to cast to our player since our player already sets itself in all of our enemies that begin play. So we can delete this macro, and instead of doing the cast, we can just do what we do on end overlap component. Plug that in, check to see if our player character is equal to the other actor. You know what, this actually might look a little better. And just move them around a little bit to look better. And with that done, we can make a new function that'll remove ourselves from the player character's all enemies array. Let's delete this macro and create a new function called remove self. Compile and save. What we're going to want to do is get our player character and get their all enemies array. Off of the all enemies array, we can simply look for remove item. And with that plugged in, we're just going to get a reference to ourself and plug that in. So it'll remove ourself from the all enemies array. And after that's done, our player character can call their enemies check function. Now we can compile and save. When are we going to want to do this? Probably when our character dies, when our enemy dies, but before they hide their widget. Let's move that over. We can remove ourself, plug that into the isValid check. And that should be it. That should work for our enemies to figure out if all of them are dead or not. Let's hop in here and kill our first enemy, our second, and our third. That's perfect. Our level end widget pops up. We can play again. Kill one of them, kill another, and kill the third. We can load our main menu. Easy as that. Looking like a real game. We can test out if the functionality scales, so let's add 2 more enemies. And let's play. Kill them. Dead. 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 Level end widget still hasn't popped up. And there we go. On the last enemy, it automatically adjusts. And that, my friends, puts us in a great place to end the video. Thank you for following along and hopefully learning something. The next video is going to be our final tutorial in the series. I can't believe it. And in the next video, we'll focus on set dressing for our game, so that's making everything look good. I'll also fix a few small bugs and improve on a little bit here and there. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out the video against the YouTube algorithm. I'm Jovan D, here to help you think like a game developer. Stay tuned for the next and final tutorial video in the first-person shooter tutorial series.